Let's catch up with Labor's Agriculture and Resources spokesperson Joel Fitzgibbon via Skype from Cessnock. Good to talk to you again, Joel.
Centre of the universe, Chris.
It is indeed.
It's where we make the world's best wines, as you know.
Wines?
Don't tell Senator Don Farrell I said that, OK?
Yeah, no, I think there's some South Australian wines that trump you, but I understand the local imperative. Let's talk about what's happening on the other side of the country. And this ship, the Kuwaiti at Fremantle, 6 crew members confirmed with coronavirus, fears that others on board could be infected. Again, we've got a bit of a debate about state versus federal authorities, how this was allowed to happen. What are your thoughts so far?
Well, Chris, 6 people have crossed our international border with coronavirus, COVID-19, and that, of course, is of great concern to everyone. And as you say, it's likely that there will be others on board that ship also infected with the virus. It's pretty clear that they received approval to dock in Fremantle from the Department of Agriculture, and I suppose Australian Border Force must fit in there somewhere as well. It also appears to be the case, based on the reports, that the master of the ship, as he or she should, advised that they had people on board with high temperatures. So there's been a failing. There's no chance they can blame the local state health department on this occasion, as they did with the Ruby Princess. This one seems to lie entirely within the authority of the Commonwealth, and therefore the responsibility of the Commonwealth.
But these people weren't getting off the ship and just freely mixing in the community in Fremantle, were they? Weren't they on board the ship? And if there were sick people on board the ship, don't we need the ship docked there and need to exercise our responsibility to care for them?
Yeah, look, because we don't know all of the facts. Obviously, what we don't know is whether anyone else went onto the ship after it pulled aside in Fremantle, and if that was the case, then they would be at risk of being infected as well. But the only thing we seem to know for certain, is that 6 people are now in Australia, having carried the disease from another country, infected with COVID-19, and the master of the ship did what you'd expect him or her to do, and that is he or she advised the authorities that was the case, and it was still allowed to dock. Now, I don't know, maybe that was the only option, and maybe taking them off the ship and putting them in a form of quarantine was the only option available to the authorities. I don't know, but it's a real problem and a real concern. We are an island nation. That's one of the reasons we've been able to do better than most in terms of flattening the curve and reducing the spread of the virus. And we can't have these breaches of our international border.
Yeah, it's going to be an ongoing problem, of course. We need shipping to continue. We've stopped cruises with passengers and the like, of course. But do we need to perhaps treat all shipping crews as quarantined to minimise their contact when they're docking, loading and unloading?
Well, if something has gone wrong at the Department of Agriculture level, you immediately ask yourself whether there are resourcing issues. Now, right back in 2017, an independent review was undertaken of the Intergovernmental Agreement on Biosecurity, and what the chair of the committee, Wendy Craik, and other members told the government is that we're going to need a lot more money spent on quarantine if we are to have the defences we aspire to have, and the community would expect us to have. They recommended a levy be put in place to raise the extra money. The government drew up draft legislation. It was going to raise some $300 million over the next 4 years. It promised it would do that, complete that work post the 2019 election, and only last week the government announced it wouldn't be proceeding with that levy. So the government needs to explain now whether the department had the resources it needs or should have, and if it's not going to strike the levy. And the absence of the levy, of course, will be welcomed by industry at this point in time with COVID-19. But how it's going to fill the very serious gaps Wendy Craik and her committee identified if it's not going to have a levy.
I will keep an eye on that. Now, Joel Fitzgibbon, did you catch the Prime Minister's speech today? And what do you think about his idea of unions and business sitting down and looking at some sort of a modern-day accord, I suppose, coming to some agreement about industrial relations freeing up from here on in?
Well, I'll tell you what I appreciated about the speech first, Chris, so you don't think I'm being too political about it. I like the fact that he acknowledged the fact that our economic architecture is not fundamentally broken. We had a health crisis which caused an economic crisis, but the economic architecture we work under has served us well for almost 40 years. It's the Hawke and Keating model that got us through the global financial crisis. It's given us something like 29 years of unbroken economic growth, and of course it's served us pretty well throughout the COVID crisis as well. I also like to focus on vocational education and training. The problem is the speech was pretty underwhelming, wasn't it, Chris? I mean, at the end of the day, he said he'd form a committee on industrial relations, bringing people from all sides into the tent for a conversation. Well, that's the normal work of government.
He's dropped the union. He's dropped the union integrity bill, and that's a big bone he's thrown to the union movement. So he's saying, "Come on board, let's try to talk peace in the future."
Well, it might also be a recognition that he was never going to get the bills to the Parliament in any case. So I don't know whether that cost him too much. But on vocational education and training, really important. No suggestion of additional government investment in the program. But the report from the so-called Joyce report was commissioned by the government in November last year and delivered to the government in January of this year. So this is not a response to COVID. This, again, is the normal course of government. Our VET system, our vocational education and training system, particularly our TAFEs, have deteriorated over the last 6 or 7 years. And it's the normal job of the government to hold a review and do something about it. I hardly see this as a substantial response to COVID-19 and the economic recovery of the country.